Well, good morning. I have to admit, this morning I really felt the pressure that Sandy had put on me the previous weeks with Christmas shirts. So I dug out my finest, I have to confess, Christmas pajamas. If you can't beat him, join him, and hopefully I'll manage to keep you awake. But if not, you've got a ready-made excuse. We're going to continue this morning in our journey to Bethlehem, and the lines that we can imagine the characters saying. This week we come to the Magi, the wise men on their journey to Bethlehem, and the question that they ask, why don't we stop and ask someone? Well, the question that we can imagine them asking. And I've asked my two sons, Sam and Josh, if you can't ask your sons, who else can you ask? If they would come and read our reading this morning from Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. And I think Josh is going to start, and then Sam.
After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born of the King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, all of Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them, "Where is the Messiah to be born?" "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written."
"But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route.
Thank you. And if you've got sight of a Bible, it's always a good idea to keep checking on the preacher, check that the speaker is speaking from the Bible, whether it be on your phone or a hard copy. I wonder, when you think of Christmas, what do you think of? I wonder what sights or sounds or even smells it brings to mind. I guess it depends who you are and what the traditions are, where you've come from. For me, growing up in the Northern Hemisphere, it brings to mind dark, cold Northern Hemisphere nights with the Christmas lights. I remember the first day that the lights would be switched on and you'd drive around the city, or maybe go down to London and see the lights on Regent Street. Or maybe you like Christmas carols. I won't ask those of you that do or don't. I'll just tell you that I love Christmas carols. You can never sing enough. And to be honest, I would sing them all year round. So if we start doing that, I'm possibly to blame for that. In fact, I have a little confession. I know it sounds really cheesy, and I know it's not technically a Christmas carol, but Jen and I got engaged to the sound of Mariah Carey singing "All I Want for Christmas Is You." I know how to do it well. But let me ask you, what about your Christmas smells? What are the smells of Christmas for you? I'll be hemisphere appropriate here. Maybe the barbecue cooking on Christmas Day. Pine tree. Or maybe if you're from the Northern Hemisphere, the turkey cooking in the oven. Whenever, as a family, we've travelled back to Europe to see family at Christmas time, we've tended to fly back through the US. And America knows how to do Christmas. They do a particularly Disney-fied version of Christmas, but they know how to do Christmas. The smells, the bells, the whistles. You go into any shop in America at Christmas and the smell of gingerbread and cinnamon and spices are everywhere. It's nauseating. No, I know it's meant to be nice and sentimental, but I have to say, for me, I find it something I just totally detest. It's too much, too strong, too artificial for me. I guess we all have our own different traditions. And if that's yours, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. But my reason for thinking about aromas at Christmas is because of a couple of intriguing verses that the Apostle Paul shares in 2 Corinthians chapter 2. Let me read them for you. He writes, "But thanks be to God who uses us to spread the aroma of the knowledge of him everywhere. For we are to God the pleasing aroma of Christ among those who are being saved and those who are perishing. To the one, we're an aroma that brings death. To the other, an aroma that brings life." The Apostle Paul is talking to Christians and he's saying, you are to spread the pleasing aroma of the Lord Jesus Christ, of the knowledge of Jesus, everywhere you go. You're to be like fragrant perfume, a pleasant smell, the pleasing aroma of Christ as he describes it. But do you see what he says? To the one, we are an aroma that brings death. There are going to be people who do not like the smell of Christ, if you like. But to the other, we are an aroma that brings life. I remember many years ago speaking at a carol service in Cardiff in Wales. And I talked about the life, or the birth and life and death and resurrection of Jesus. And I remember afterwards, as students gathered around to talk to me, 2 people came up straight away. One of them absolutely livid with me. Furious. You can't say that Jesus is the only way to God. What do you think you're saying? He was raging. And immediately after, the next student said, I have no idea what that guy was talking about. I want to hear more about Jesus. To the one, with the smell of death. To the other, we are the smell of life. And here, we are going to see this in this passage today. As we look at this passage from Matthew 2, we'll see, as in this story, we meet 3 different kings. And I'm not talking about the we 3 kings of Orient are, one in a taxi, one in a car, one on a scooter playing his hooter. Didn't get very far. I said to Jen, if I tell that in the sermon, we're in trouble this morning because I've already gone for my notes. But that's the one I remember. There are 3 kings in this story. And you'll see them, not just the 3 kings of Orient. The story unfolds. And as the journey continues, you'll see different responses to Jesus. To some, he's this pleasing aroma who brings life, and to others, he's the offensive aroma that brings death. And I suppose the question right at the start this morning as we gather is, which is Jesus to you? Is he that aroma of life or one of death? Let's look at the passage and see what it shows of these different responses to Jesus. The first response we see comes in verses 1 and 2 from our first group of kings, the Magi, as they're known. Look at verses 1 and 2. We're told a little about who they are, but more about when they came. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. If you're the sort of person that takes notes, here's our first response. They're curious about Jesus. They come during the time of King Herod, one of the other kings that we're going to see later on. And the focus here is on the Magi who arrive. We're not told how long after that they've arrived, although it clearly is a bit later. If you look at verses 9 and 11, there's a clue where Jesus is described as the child. He's not just a baby here, he's a child. And they're Magi, kings or wise men. They're likely from a Persian background, a priestly caste. They're definitely not Jews, they're Gentiles. And they're an important part of the administrations of the ancient Near East, or what we would know these days as Syria. And they've got all sorts of expertise in magic, astrology, divination. It's important to remember as we read the Bible that the Bible isn't condoning those things. It's not saying that we should be into those things as well. But rather, it's recognizing the presence of those things in practice in everyday life in Bible times. And it's clear as you look at verse 2 that they know something of Jesus. Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Just as an aside, I have found in New Zealand there are many people who know something of Jesus. Now, it might not be much, might not be very detailed, but like the wise men, they know something of Jesus and they want to know more. Even sometimes the most unexpected people. I remember being at Ramsey House, which is down at Victoria University. It's part of the chaplaincy. I was at an international student gathering, and a student from mainland China turned to me with no hello, no friendly welcome or greeting, other than, "Tell me about Jesus." And I was so taken aback by a student asking me that. I said, "Tell me why you're asking that question." Turns out he was from mainland China. He'd been told, "Don't ask anything about Jesus." Well, that's the last thing you do to students. Don't tell them what to do because they'll go and disobey. But there are people who know something or want to know something about Jesus. And they're in your schools, they're in your workplaces, they're in your neighborhood, maybe in your family. People who want to know more about Jesus. And the wise men here have some knowledge, but they want to know more of Jesus. And so they ask a question. Maybe you're the person here this morning that is exploring. Maybe you've come because it's Christmas and you thought, "You know what, I should go to church." It is good to explore. It's good to ask questions. Sometimes you get people with a very strange idea of, "Don't ask any questions." No, let me encourage you. Ask questions. Find out more about Jesus. And we see that these questions eventually help them be led to Jesus. Partly why this church has run courses like Christianity Explored, because we want people to meet Jesus. It's good to be curious about Jesus, but it's not good if that's all you ever are. You need to follow through and investigate. And that's what these wise men do. They've seen his star, they've asked the question, and so they take the next steps. Our second response comes in verses 3 and 4. Here we meet the second king, this time King Herod. Look at verse 3. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. If you're taking notes, he's troubled by Jesus. Now, take a moment. This is a familiar story. Stop and think about it. This is mighty King Herod, in charge of Bethlehem and all Galilee and Judea. This is little baby Jesus, maybe a child, let's be honest. A child and a king. And the king is troubled by the child. Not just the king, but all Jerusalem is troubled. King Herod was a half Jew, half Edomite. He's been appointed by the Roman Senate, and he's gained control of the country. And he's up against this little toddler, baby Jesus, the King of the Jews. This morning we've seen the joy and the innocence and the delight of new life. The arrival of a new baby is something very special, an exciting moment. Just think of the opportunity and the potential of those little children this morning. And Herod is troubled by that. We're told what he was feeling. He was disturbed. But we're not told the why of why he was feeling that. Well, the reason is fairly simple. He feared his rivals. He knew he was vulnerable to the claims of a king of the true Davidic dynasty. He is troubled by Jesus. But not only Herod, but all Jerusalem with him. Again, we're not told why. Remember that this is Jerusalem waiting for its Messiah, looking for the one that's been anointed. And suddenly he arrives, and they're troubled. I think maybe it's a hint of what is to come. What's awaiting Jerusalem later in the same gospel? Do you remember Jesus' words? Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. Remember that Jesus is going to be the stone that the builders rejected. And here he's coming to this town, and they're troubled by him. Speaking of trouble, earlier this week I was driving in Lower Hutt, where I live, to work in Wellington. It was 11 o'clock on a weekday morning. I drove down the street and I saw a police officer ahead of me. You know the feeling. Uh-oh. I could see they were setting up what looked like it was an alcohol checkpoint. And I have to say, the thought that went through my mind was, uh-oh. Now, don't worry. It was just a guilty conscience. No reason for it. I just saw the police and started to feel guilty about everything that I might have ever done. I knew I hadn't had a drink for several weeks, so it was all fine. But immediately, I felt guilty. I drove up to the police officer, and you'll be pleased to know that my breath test was absolutely fine. No alcohol in the system, and I was sent on my way. But for many of us, that is the way we approach Jesus. Not that we know that we've done no wrong, but, oh no, he's here to judge me and to think of all the things that we have done wrong. Now, hear me clearly. It is right that before a holy God, our consciences do prick us. We are sinful men and women. God has come as judge, but the Bible tells us, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Imagine if I've gone tramping in the Tararuas. Hypothetical story. It's not like me. But if I did, the chances of me getting lost are probably fairly great. So I've gone tramping in the Tararuas. I've got lost. And maybe after the second night of being lost, Jen has suddenly realized there's an issue. She's phoned the emergency services. My husband's in the Tararuas, lost. I'm concerned for him. And so they send out land search and rescue and the emergency services. And there's me panicking because I'm lost. 2 nights, 3 nights, whatever it is. Imagine coming through the bush and encountering a police officer there. How do you think I would feel? Do you think I'd have the same pangs of guilt that I had when I encountered the police officer the other day? No! I'd be delighted because he's my rescuer. Now, Jesus comes as both judge and rescuer. Why is Herod troubled? Well, he knows. The King of the Jews, judge of all the earth. So in the midst of all this concern, Herod calls together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law. And he asks them, where is the Messiah to be born? And they say, in Bethlehem, in Judea, for this is what the prophet has written. For those of you that think we can be New Testament Christians only, it's a great reminder. The prophets are pointing forwards. Don't just read the New Testament. Look at where Christ is being shown in the Old Testament. In Bethlehem, as we heard, the house of bread, the town where the bread of life is going to come from. Remember some time ago, years ago, town of Wootton Bassett in Wiltshire in England changed its name at that stage by Queen's decree to Royal Wootton Bassett. It was a town where military soldiers were repatriated after the Afghanistan or through the Afghanistan war. And each time a soldier was repatriated, their body came through, the crowd would gather and clap, just bearing tribute to those that had gone and sacrificed. And so the town was changed to Royal Wootton Bassett. Here, this is Royal Bethlehem. It's in the line of David. It's not just where the shepherd king came from, it's where the good shepherd is going to come from, the King of Kings. Bethlehem, this little insignificant town, is going to become great because out of their midst will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. They were troubled by Jesus. And the thing is, today in our world, there are people who are troubled by Jesus. There are people in New Zealand who are, but there are people all over the world. People who see him as a threat. People who wish to do harm to him and his followers. And even in the midst of this trouble, God is at work. God will reveal himself wherever people are looking for him. This is true in so many of the places today, places that we pray for and partner with in this church, where people are troubled by Jesus. God is at work, revealing himself to those who seek him. Let's look at our third response. Curious about Jesus, troubled by Jesus, verses 7 and 8, plotting against Jesus. Herod understands some of who Jesus is. He knows he's troubled by him, he's threatened by him, and so this angst turns into action. Look at verses 7 and 8. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me that I may go and worship him." Herod has no interest in worshipping Jesus. He simply wants to eliminate him. And so his true motives come out. He wants to know when the star appeared. And he's trying to work out how old the child is so that he can eliminate those children as he does. Note, it's not just Herod here who has no interest in who Jesus truly is, but actually some of the people that really ought to have known better. The chief priests and the teachers of the law from verse 4, they know the scriptures. They've been looking for Jesus. They know where he's going to be born. They know some of the details about how and where the Messiah would be born, but they have no interest in following the Magi. You see, you can know everything you can about Jesus. You might know the scriptures brilliantly. You might have come to this church endlessly, but you can still be threatened by